Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ken Mewburn. I'm the president of a little community organisation called TAPP, which stands for Take Action for Pumicestone Passage. And this morning I'd like to give you a little bit of an insight into why we formed and a bit of information about Pumicestone Passage. TAPP was formed in December 2010. There's a major development south of Caloundra called Caloundra South, and it was taken over by the ULDA, the Urban Land Development Authority, and the state government at the time was talking about fast tracking. Now the Urban Land Development Authority has the power to override council decisions and approvals. We considered it was rather a risk to Pumicestone Passage. Caloundra South is situated in a fairly sensitive area of the catchment. It's positioned in an area that's bordered by 3 creeks and it's part floodplain. And we considered that an environmental assessment would definitely be the absolute minimum prior to Caloundra South being developed. As a result, we started walking the streets on New Year's Eve 2010 with a petition to the federal government. The Labor government was in power at the time, and we were asked a number of questions during that period of time. It rather surprised me because we'd front up with our petition form and people said, oh yeah, certainly sign that about Caloundra South, but what's Pumicestone Passage and why is it important and what's happening to it? So I thought today I would try and answer some of those questions. Pumicestone Passage is a shallow estuary. People look at you and they say, what on earth is all of that? It's a shallow estuary bordered by Bribie Island and the mainland. It's approximately 35 kilometres long. It's 45 if you paddle down the water. And it receives inflows from numerous small creeks and is subject to tidal flushing. Has a catchment area of 758 square kilometres, so it's a big area. It goes all the way up to the hinterland and down into the Moreton Bay region. It's shared by 2 council regions, the Moreton Bay Regional Council and the Sunshine Coast Council. It's approximately 64 square kilometres. There's 24 islands, 240 kilometres of coastline. The passage was originally called Pumicestone River by Matthew Flinders in 1799, and he called it that because there was a lot of pumicestone laying along the shoreline, and he thought that that was probably historic leftovers from the Glasshouse Mountains, and it wasn't. It's actually come from somewhere else, probably South Seas, undersea eruptions or South Sea Islands. But in 1822, John Bingle paddled and sailed up the passage and he discovered that it opened at the Caloundra Bar. So it wasn't a river, it was actually a passage. And it still doesn't make it unusual if it wasn't all an estuary. Now Pumicestone Passage is a double estuary because it's got 2 ends to it, open on both ends. It's not just a channel, it is an estuary. And there's 758 estuaries in Australia, it's 296 in Queensland, 28 in southeast Queensland. It's the only double estuary I can name, and it's the only one that anybody can tell me about. People claim Hinchinbrook Channel is a double estuary. It's not, it's a channel. The Herbert River end of Hinchinbrook is probably an estuary. It would be counted as an estuary because it blends with fresh water. So it was gazetted as a marine park in 1986, part of the Moreton Bay Marine Park. The area contains a range of habitats. It's got mangroves, salt marshes, sand and mud flats, seagrass beds and coastal dunes. So these support a wide variety of animal communities by providing rich feeding grounds and breeding grounds. Some of the key species, there's 350 species of marine invertebrates, there's 60 fish species, and it's a declared fish habitat. It's and a hatchery for many species. There's over 300 species of coastal birds in the region. That makes it very important because we talk about Kakadu Park. Kakadu has 280 species. So there's 328 species listed in the council website. So we're kind of special in that regard. It's got turtle species, including the vulnerable green and hawksbill turtles and the endangered loggerhead turtle. It's home to the endangered dugong. There's 7 species of mangrove and there's 7 species of seagrass. There's 46 species of mangrove in Australia. There's only 80 species in the world, and to my knowledge Australia has about the 3rd largest area of mangroves. Queensland certainly has the largest area in Australia. Mangroves are a pretty special plant actually. They're an amazing carbon sink. They have about 10 times the carbon sequestration of a tree of the same size. They're a very important part of the biodiversity. They're also extremely good at controlling shoreline erosion. They're a protection for fish hatcheries. No mangroves, no fish is the saying. Pumicestone Passage is considered important and unique as part of Moreton Bay Marine Park. It is protected by a number of national and international instruments or treaties. It's protected by the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, the Kamba, the Jamba and the Rocamba bilateral treaties with China, Japan, Korea. Now Kamba is spelled C-A-M-B-A, that simply means China-Australia Migratory Bird Agreement. The same with the Jamba and Rocamba. And it's a recognised wetland under the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands because it's part of Moreton Bay Marine Park. So people look at you sideways and say, what the heck is Ramsar? What's that mean? Okay, Ramsar is not an acronym. It doesn't stand for anything. It was a town in Iran. In the 2nd of February 1971, there were 21 nations, including Australia, signed a convention to protect wetlands of international significance. There are now over 2,000 Ramsar sites designated around the world. There's 168 countries involved. Moreton Bay Marine Park is Australia's site number 41. There's 65 Ramsar sites in Australia. Moreton Bay was designated a Ramsar site on the 22nd of October 1993. So the Environmental Protection, or the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999 is an act under which areas of international significance are protected in Australia. This is a federal government act. It was actually a Howard government decision to create that because they figured it was very worthwhile to have something specific to protect our Ramsar sites. Unfortunately, our federal government is reverting much of the control back to the states, which takes away that other overarching cover that we had. It concerns me because it reduces the extra level of protection afforded by federal intervention in matters of national environmental significance. If it wasn't for the EPBC Act, we would have had the dam up in the Mary River, for example. So what are the threats to the passage? People say, what are we doing to it? What's the problems with it? The shallow nature in itself makes it an ideal nursery for a host of invertebrate, algae and seagrass, which in turn support a myriad of marine and bird species. However, by its very nature is subject to adverse impact from natural and human events. Events that can negatively impact in this sensitive food chain are increase in nutrients from agriculture or forestry within the catchment, changes in turbidity from sediment resulting from construction and bank erosion. So every time you dig your garden, every time you mow your lawn, think about the things that you put down the drain. Sediment deposits potentially resulting in a change in water depth and the influx of toxins through stormwater runoff from urban and industrial areas. A lot of the problems that we have in the local area where I live was sewage infiltration into the passage because the sewer system overflows. The accumulation of waste in the wetlands. You know, there's around about 300,000 litres of rubbish per year is currently retrieved by community volunteers in the area. 300,000 litres is a lot of rubbish. Human activity is by far the greatest threat. Humans, I'd say they're worse than termites really. We do not adapt to the environment and generally try to modify the environment to suit their purposes. The greatest risk of natural processes can be our response to those in the form of asset protection. Sure, if the banks start to erode, to cut away our roads or our houses, we do something to try and prevent it, which changes what nature's trying to do. The passage, like all estuaries, establishes an equilibrium. After forming, will ultimately gouge out with tidal and flood action and then build up sediment until the flushing rate can maintain the sediment. In other words, it becomes a state of equilibrium. It digs out till the flow in and out, the tidal changes is enough to keep the depth of the passage. We put extra dirt in it. Of course, it can't do it, and it spreads out a little wider, which changes the erosion on the shoreline. So, if we said left to nature, this process would continue, varying only for extreme weather events, and then re-establish equilibrium. Continual changes on shore, development, rock walls, groins, etc. interfere with the establishment of natural equilibrium and can disguise truly natural changes. Estuaries are ephemeral by nature, which means short-lived or continually changing. But we don't like that. We build something, we want our water views to be the same as they were when we built there. Throughout history, the passage has changed. According to geologists, it formed about 6,000 to 6,500 years ago. The sea level receded from approximately 3 metres above current level. So it's an interesting thought for the future. Don't think any of us will be around to see it, but it will probably go back to where it was. And 3 metres would make a lot of us very, very wet. Where we're standing at the moment, we'd be needing a snorkel. At this time, the coast would have been maybe 3 kilometres or more inland of its current position. With human settlement, the land is cleared, sediment entry is greater than natural levels, and flushing does not completely stabilise the estuary. This results in bank erosion or beach loss. A response is generally to dredge sand from the passage to pump onto the beach in an effort to overcome the impact of the erosion. This has many disadvantages. Collateral damage to living organisms and other marine life unable to escape the process. And the re-establishment of equilibrium may destabilise other dependent factors. In other words, the passage would try to re-stabilise itself in a different position with a different depth, and it changes the shoreline. It's reasonable to consider that progressive development in the catchment will have continuing impacts, some of which will result in adverse consequences. It was on this basis that TAPP took the action of petitioning to ensure an assessment under the EPBC Act was conducted on Caloundra South prior to the commencement of any development. So let me talk about Caloundra South for a minute. Caloundra South is an area of 2,310 hectares. Approximately 1,600 hectares will be developed. It's wholly owned by one developer and is the biggest single development on the Sunshine Coast. There'll be about 20 to 25,000 dwellings and about 50,000 people at the completion of the project. The development had a timeline of about 20 to 30 years construction time. That'll probably vary depending on the growth rate in the Sunshine Coast and the take-up of the new dwellings. Caloundra South's part of a massive growth for the Sunshine Coast. The 2009 to 2031 South East Queensland Regional Plan showed an expected need for 98,500 new dwellings by 2031. That's approximately 190,000 to 200,000 extra people for that period of time. This based on a population growth rate of nearly 3%. Now 3% then, if it's slowed to 2%, it's probably still going to grow just as fast because the more people you've got, growth rate is exponential. So if you've got twice as many people, 1.5% will give you the same number of people arriving all the time. And that's something to remember. So we now have estimated, or the government has estimated, in their review of the South East Queensland Regional Plan, that we're going to need another 15 to 20,000 dwellings by 2041. So that's a little bit faster growth rate in the following 10 years. And it's for that reason that we have a current problem, which I'll talk about shortly. Population increase will have many social impacts. Recreational use of Pumicestone Passage is expected to increase further, adding to social changes, crowded roads, beaches, boat ramps and parking areas. We don't have too much beach rage yet, but we probably will. Infrastructure needs will increase with added demands on roads, hospitals, police, power needs and sewage requirements. these demands will have a financial impact in addition to the social impact. If anybody reads the paper, you might have noticed something about a $560 million shortfall in the infrastructure for Caloundra South. Not necessarily a shortfall, it was there all the time, they just didn't like to talk about it. The development is expected to bring with it the plus sides of economic growth and greater business potential, along with the expected increase in local employment. There's a critical need to advance employment opportunity in harmony with the development progress to avoid creating an increase in residents needing to travel to Brisbane and other areas to work. In other words, we don't want it to become a dormitory estate. Knowing that one of the major risks of the water quality of the passage is increased turbidity, the construction stage of Caloundra South will impose a major risk. During the construction stages, greater risk of erosion and excessive sediment flow will exist. It is this stage that TAPP consider a need to ensure Stockland do maintain their work standards as detailed in the master plan. In reality, my own personal belief is almost impossible to achieve the objectives that they have. If they have the objectives, theoretically it will work. In practice, there is no way they can improve the water quality. If you look at the little chart that's on the wall down in our marquee, it shows the water quality has deteriorated from a B to a C+. Everybody's talking about, isn't it great, it's been a C+ for 2 years. We haven't had any rain. You wait till it rains and see where it goes. There's a planned benefit for wildlife in the new development. This one good thing about the master plan includes vegetated wildlife corridors, green space and buffer zones along the creeks. There'll be cycle paths, community centres. The intent is that the development will not be car dependent, which is interesting because the railway line isn't planned to be put through there till after the development is completed. So if that doesn't breed car dependency, I'm darned if I know what does. This will require progressive provision of employment locally and suitable recreation facilities within the development. Let's look at existing development. So we'll get away from Caloundra South and think about what we've got there and what we're likely to get. The existing suburbs of Golden Beach is progressively expanded with the development of Pelican Waters. Pelican Waters is a canal estate. Ultimately around 12,500 population, it drains directly to Pumicestone Passage. I listened to a comment by the developers who said they were actually improving the water quality of Pumicestone Passage with the development of Pelican Waters. An impossibility. If you consider putting an eyedropper full of crystal clear water into a glass full of dirty water and see how it improves the quality of the water in the glass, you wouldn't drink it still. So impacts will be noticed by the number and variety of water-based activities, the increased demand for boat launching facilities, parking, shore-based activities, picnic, etc. For example, in Pelican Waters, there is an 80-boat marina, as well as private marinas and all the houses on the canal estates. There's a 200-boat dry dock stacker. Now, those guys aren't just going to paddle around in their canal, they want to use the passage, so there's going to be a lot of further activity in the passage in recreational manners. So all of that's going to place additional risk of pollution in the water. Remember I said there's 300,000 litres of rubbish already collected. Generally, people are found to be responsible for about 5 items of rubbish each. And sadly, a lot of it will enter the passage. It's essential that the community takes control and ensures that visitors and others respect the potential impacts. One of the issues we have on the Sunshine Coast is that population is about 10 times the resident population are visitors to the coast. So you have about over 300,000 people live here, and about 3 million visitors a year. So we're 10% of the people that poke around here, and because we live here, it's imperative that we make sure that our area is respected. Progressive development to date has created negative impacts on water quality in Pumicestone Passage. And I can't see my wildest imagination how more of the same is going to reduce those impacts. So we talk about additional growth, so it is now evident that additional planning is required for accommodating growth beyond the time of the current South East Queensland Regional Plan, which is a government document covering the period 2009 to 2031. There are two areas that currently feature in the South East Queensland Regional Plan. These are commonly referred to as Halls Creek and Beerwah East IGAs, or Identified Growth Areas. So what are they? I mean, people, when we mention Halls Creek, they look at you and say, why are you worried about something in another state? There's one in Victoria, there's one in Queensland. Halls Creek's a tiny little creek that enters the passage, and it's noted on some maps, but it's a very bad name for a development. The area referred to as Halls Creek is immediately south of the Bells Creek Road. Testing, 1, 2, it's on the air. Right, we're back in action. Okay, the area referred to as Halls Creek is immediately south of Bells Creek Road, connects to the bottom of Caloundra South, and extends southeast between the Bruce Highway and Pumicestone Passage. The developer's argument is you won't see it from the highway when we talk about reducing the interurban break. No, you won't initially, but you wait till they develop between there and the highway in the years to come. Beerwah East is situated west of the Bruce Highway, covering the area between Beerwah and the Northern Railway line, along part of Steve Irwin Way, back to the Bruce Highway. The designated Beerwah East site is the location of the proposed multimodal transport corridor known as CAMCOS. And CAMCOS stands for Caboolture Maroochydore Corridor Study. And this would ultimately connect the Sunshine Coast to Brisbane rail line at Beerwah. I mean, it's a corridor we need. If we're going to get rid of cars and things in the area, we need to have rail service. We need to have some sort of public transport service. The issue has been confused by many pieces of information, such as the location, size of the area, some considerations of ownership. In fact, I could almost say a lot of consideration of ownership. It's possibly difficult for some in the community to understand the concerns raised by council and residents. But land in the Beerwah East IGA is currently part of the forestry estate and subject to a 99-year lease with 96 years remaining. It's interesting to note that the lease was only signed by the state government in 2011, long after they designated the rail corridor site through Beerwah East. Which is very interesting. Government look to the future, don't they? After Beerwah East has been identified as an IGA in the South East Queensland Regional Plan. Land in the Beerwah East IGA is not available for urban development until the lease is bought out or surrendered. So the fact that it's leased for 99 years creates significant but not insurmountable issues for Beerwah East. Development of similar size to that proposed at Halls Creek would require only 1,000 hectares of land. Only about a third of the Beerwah East IGA and represents about 0.4% of the total pine forestry lease. The area would either need to be bought out or an alternative area would need to be provided. Halls Creek provides a possible location, provides such an alternative. It was part of the forestry estate until the early 2000s and can be used for forestry again. Certainly be an advantage over the idea of putting houses there. Halls Creek, CAMCOS was originally proposed for completion in 2018 but now is not scheduled to commence until 2031. And one of the key reasons for this delay is that there is said to be insufficient population density to support the investment case. Planning for future growth along the corridor strengthens the argument for investment in CAMCOS, which will benefit everyone who lives along the line right through Caloundra, Hankawana and Maroochydore. Halls Creek, on the other hand, does not sit adjacent to any existing road or rail infrastructure, does little to strengthen the case for rail duplication or CAMCOS. Proposes to connect to the Bruce Highway and Caloundra Road via the Kawana Arterial Road, which will be built as part of the Caloundra South development. It would seem a logical conclusion that if Halls Creek site was chosen for development, it would ultimately be an addition to Beerwah East, not as an alternative. unless the Camcos corridor is removed from future planning. So why are TAPP and almost every other community group concerned about the potential for development of Halls Creek? And why has the council rejected it? Okay, under Queensland legislation, local government has the responsibility for planning decisions relating to development occurring within its local government area. Now that's a very, very important part of our democratic right. I mean, we have the right to make a decision where we're going to build and how and what. Caloundra City Council and Sunshine Coast Council have considered future development of the Halls Creek area for almost 15 years. They've consistently rejected the area as unsuitable. The state government included the Halls Creek area in the South East Queensland Regional Plan against the recommendations of Sunshine Coast Council and the community. 2004, the Caloundra Council released the Caloundra City Plan, which excluded development south of the Master Plan Caloundra South development. This position was supported by the government then in power. The position was further confirmed in 2007 with the release of the Local Growth Management Scheme by Caloundra City Council. The Sunshine Coast Regional Council also confirmed this position in the Sunshine Coast Growth Management paper in 2008. The draft planning scheme in 2011 and the Sunshine Coast Council final planning scheme in 2014. All of these plans, Sunshine Coast received submissions from the public which supported the council position. Sunshine Coast Regional Council submitted a response to the government's inclusion of the Halls Creek area in 2009, 2031 South East Queensland Regional Plan. This submission confirmed the position of council and community in all previous planning schemes, and their submission stated, and I quote, "Major changes to the urban footprint for the Sunshine Coast are not supported. The identification of a potential new urban growth area to the south of the proposed Caloundra South Master Plan community is contrary to the preferred settlement pattern for the Sunshine Coast as outlined in the Sunshine Coast Growth Management Position Paper 2008. It is considered that the Caloundra South extension is likely to have significant impacts on the interurban break between the Moreton Bay sub-region and the Sunshine Coast sub-region, as well as potentially negative impacts on the coastal wetlands of the Pumicestone Passage. Therefore, Council recommends that the South East Queensland Regional Plan 2009-2031 delete all reference to the Caloundra South Extension investigation area and keep the land classified in the land use category of regional landscape and rural production area. It is of interest, the argument at the moment is the fact that the Sunshine Coast Council plan cannot be passed by the government until it includes Halls Creek as an IGA. Now that flies in the face of the requirements for council to designate the areas for development. It also denies us our democratic right to say no. And I would ask, what part of no don't the government understand? But that's what the argument is about. So TAPP, along with most other community groups, agree fully with the council submission. I mean, there's a lot of information in the council submission about the reasons it shouldn't be selected. The argument against the Halls Creek site is not about who owns it or is planning to develop it. And this is something that sadly has clouded the issue no end. It's a big developer, it's the owner of Caloundra South, and we look at big developers and say, hey, they're too big, they shouldn't be doing it. But it's not about that. The argument is that the community has a right to have decisions respected by government, and the request to remove this area from the South East Queensland Regional Plan is reasonable and a basic democratic right. Our local council has deemed the area unsuitable. This has been supported by the community in consultation and submissions. TAPP currently have a petition requesting the South East Queensland Regional Plan be amended to reflect the Sunshine Coast Plan. Some of our members can be seen around the area today collecting signatures. You can sign the petition at our stall. I did intend to have it being able to be signed online, but because of the fact that it's almost impossible to read the computer screen in our little marquee, we can't do that. We're interested to speak with you, get your views, whether you agree with us or you don't agree. I've got broad shoulders, I can take criticisms. We can give you access to information to assist you make your own submissions or write letters in relation to this matter. The fact is, we still have time to do something about Halls Creek. We still have time to push the government. There's two ministers, the Honourable Mark McArdle, who's the Minister for Water and Energy, and the Minister for the Environment, the Honourable Andrew Powell, have been commissioned to collect public community opinion about Halls Creek, and that's what we're trying to do. That's who our petition is directed to. Hopefully I've been able to explain some of the implications of growth, the impacts on the environment, the waterways and our way of life. And just a couple of little quotes that I've noticed of late, and one that I think we need to think very serious about is endless material growth on a finite planet is clearly impossible. And Stan Tutt, a well-known Sunshine Coast identity, now deceased, quoted in one of his books, "You can't stop progress, nor can you avoid the impact on the environment and your way of life." It's well worth thinking about. So help us to help the community. Come and talk to us. Sign our petition. If you don't want to sign the petition, that's your democratic right. But I'd like to know your reasons. Thank you very much. Any questions?